So this sort of gives us a sense of what scale of lettering we can look at, moving up to an equal-line. When we look at brush pens, one of the things we need to be really conscious of is what is the kind of shape we're aiming to produce from the brush pen. So a really good starting point is a soft pencil like a 6B pencil. So this is a Doant graphic pencil. Now, when you produce the letters, are you aiming to write copperplate script? Because that will tell you what kind of brush pen you want, what kind of tip you need to produce the kinds of shape you're aiming for. You can also do a more angular script, or you can put the tool on the side and produce a higher contrast to the shapes. Now, once you have that sense of what you're aiming for, you then start looking at the tips of the brush pens. Now, brush pens come in lots of tips. This is a Kuretake Bimoji. And the thing that I start off with is I look at what the tip can do. So, really thin hairlines, which can be quite long, or by not pressing, but by tilting my hand and applying a little bit of pressure, I can test the width that the tip would produce. This helps me to determine what kinds of letters I will get away with when I apply pressure. So even though the whole tip is moving, it's still really sharp. So this is quite a flexible but very sharp tip. Next, we move to something like a Pentel Touch. So this gives us really nice hairlines, not as fine. So they give really good tapered strokes, and they give 3 different widths. So we get and what this tells me is that, see how narrow these letters are, that these are a little bit wider, that when you come down at the base, you need a little bit more circular rotation because the tip is so flexible. Now, that also tells me that you have different kinds of tops. So we can get that top, we can get press and wait, that top, we can get this top, we can get that, and we can get that. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 variants for the top of the shape of the letter. Next, we move to something that's even softer and more flexible in the tip. So this is a Mavyo Le Pen Flex. And this works best lightly or heavy. If you're looking for medium deposition, it's a little bit trickier to do that kind of writing, because you're having to control how much the tool is going to spread. So if you're going to work bigger, so the grid is 6 mil between the lines, so I'm working at 12. I'd probably only really work at 9 for this type of pen. Again, test the top. So you really start to understand what the tool can produce. Next, I'm going to look at the Fudenosuke, Tombow Fudenosuke. And so this gives us, again, a really nice, sharp, long line that's tapered. And this works really well in a small space. I'm really taking my time with the shape as well. So of course I'm doing more sort of copper plate script style letter forms, which can be quite easily augmented into something like modern calligraphy, or you can have a more sort of contemporary, almost ruling pen-like brushstroke structure. Again, come back to the tip. What can it do? What kinds of lines will it produce? How will it taper? And of course, that then leads us to what will it produce? If we're hoping to produce something like a copper plate script capital. Now, those slightly more sort of structured bullet tips, which are flexible brush tips, are different from these. So these are bigger tips. So this is 6mm. And it gives us that kind of line. So of course, this immediately tells us that we cannot write that small. Because if you're trying to write that small, you don't end up with the contrast between the hairline and the weighted stroke. So you tend to want to work bigger with these. So these tend to work sort of more medium to large in the kinds of letters they produce. And if we change the angle of the tool, we could even get it to go a lot bigger. The next, so that's a Caran D'ache Fibralo brush. And then this is an online Callibrush, which is a really nice tip. And of course the color is absolutely stunning. So a really beautiful vibrance. And again, this tip is even longer than the previous tip, which is a Caran D'ache tip. So instead of working at 2, so we could work at 12mm, it's probably better to work bigger. So the next tip up is, so I'm going to use a Kuretake brushable tip, and you can see this tip is considerably larger. So again, we go back to looking at the scale. And I'm also looking at the contrast. What happens with the hairlines and the weight and the hairlines? I'm going to go up a size. So this sort of gives us a sense of what scale of lettering we can look at. Moving up to an Ecoline brush pen. So these are really soft tips and they have huge saturation. So obviously you'd want to work a lot bigger with these. You can work smaller. They're a little bit more difficult to control at a smaller size. Now, as we're looking at these tips that I call spongy tips, I don't really like to call them felt tips because invariably they're not felt. We also have to look at the Spectrum Noir Artliner brush. And that allows us to do really small work. Well, not really, I mean 6mm. But it's better at 12. And it's really nice at 18. So this is a very different kind of tip. It's the whole tip moves, the whole tip flexes. I wouldn't flex it that much because it could damage the tip. And so that sort of covers most of the range of these slightly more rigid solid tips which are flexible. The next range of brushes that you work with, I call filamented brushes. So I call them filamented brushes because they have these like hairs, like bristles. I don't like to call them bristle brushes because I find when I think of bristle brushes, I think of really rigid brushes. So just zoom in a little bit there. So these brush pens, so this is a Pentel pocket pen, produce real brush-like shapes. They have a cartridge on the inside, but they can also produce a sort of copper plate-like shape, like so. You can get a slightly more cursive kind of brush lettering, which again mimics sort of ruling pen work. Or you move to something like a Fude 8 brush pen. So this is a Kuretake brush pen. Again, this is filamented. And it does behave like a brush. And again, you can produce some modern calligraphy view. Or some again, that kind of ruling pen brush script. I always tell people don't write big if the tool is small, and don't try to write small if the tool is big, because if you push a small tool to write big, you damage the core, which is on the inside of there. Once the core is damaged, you can't fix it. So this is a Kuretake Clean Color brush, or real brush. And it, because it's smaller than the Fude 8, it can also do reasonably small lettering. So that, again, that's at 6mm or at 12mm. So I hope that gives you a sense of what to look for when you're choosing a brush. And you know, there are bigger tools. You know, Kuretake actually do other brush pens which come in even larger sizes. So these are the Cambio brush pens, and this is the medium. So it produces that shape, and it can go up again in size. And of course, there are other sizes in this. This is an even bigger tip. So I'm just going to go over the lettering I've just done. So it's really important to know, you know, what size the tool can produce, and in that Cambio range you have a small as well, which is really lovely and thin. So understanding what shapes you want to produce, and then looking at the tip of the tool would give you a much better sense of which tool to get, and obviously how to spend your money. Thanks very much.
Ooh.